Hey, everybody, and welcome to Key Conversations for Leaders. I'm your host, John Ryan, and today we have a very special guest, Joseph Young. Joseph is a software solutions architect, founder and CEO of Kuvio Creative, a software design, branding, and marketing company, and they are a location-independent agency serving clients throughout the world. Welcome to the show, Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Joseph, I want to know if you wouldn't mind starting with, just telling us a little bit about your story and how did you get started with Kuvio Creative? How did that all come about?
Oh gosh, I mean, I could start all the way back to my childhood, as probably can most people. So as a child, I was a self-taught piano player. That was kind of my entire childhood was built around music. And one thing that I've kind of noticed over the years, as I've done reflection about my life, is that I feel like the big pattern that I picked up there with music and with teaching myself how to play piano was that I was always just very fascinated in patterns, in things that were beautiful, and like, oh, this particular sequence of events, that sounded really good. I must have hit up on something. And that just took me all the way through childhood because I was constantly fascinated, and that became my passion and my motivation for continuing with music. Then sort of my life took a turn and I became rebellious the last year of my high school and kind of lost all my scholarships and my kind of typical path. And for whatever reason, ended up joining the military, joining the Air Force because I was interested in aviation and I wanted to do air traffic control. Um, Unbeknownst to me, or maybe beknownst to me kind of unconsciously, air traffic control, the entire career is about patterns, right? It's about you've got 30 planes flying in. How do you put them together in a particular way so that everybody is safe and that it flows well and things like that? And so I really, really enjoyed it. But that was also sort of my first foray into what does the adult life look like? And in the military taught me sort of this is all that I knew, right? So it taught me, well, it looks like the adult life is just pure bureaucracy and a bunch of politics and people in charge that probably shouldn't be in charge because they've been there longer. And this weird sort of, fixed hierarchy of power that, like, unless powerful people yourself or you do good on tests, you're never going to be able to leverage your own talents in a way that will get you anywhere unless you spend 30 years there to try to get there, right? And so that kind of started, you know guiding my thoughts on things. But the last half of my military career I spent completely overseas. I went to South Korea and then spent 4 years in Italy, and did 6 months in Iraq as well. And every one of those places was at a Korean or Italian or Iraqi base. So we were working side by side with coworkers that were, either military or civilian of that. And this was sort of my first foray into, oh my gosh, now I have coworkers that are not in charge of me, that don't have the same sort of power structure, but we're working together. And in some cases I'm in charge, in some cases, they're in charge. How do I interact in this situation? If I'm in a leadership position, now that I have the ability to do something, what do I do about it? And what was so interesting about it is that the best possible thing that always worked was also somehow the simplest. All I had to do was step back and give them the space to find their own path, right? And whatever it was that I had the power in that particular situation to do, all I could do was give them the space to do that, right? Which is basically the opposite of what most sort of managerial positions are, which is like dictate, dictate, dictate until you finally, get your working day to a point that is productive, right? According to the managerial dictates. But in this case, it was like, that's not leading anywhere because it's just putting all of the onus of what the definition of productivity is on the very people who have stopped doing that job or who have never done that job in the first place, instead of instead of just giving people the space to find their own path and to find their own talents and to really like hone themselves and figure out what they're passionate about and what they do best. And so I ended up with this sort of topsy turvy relationship with particularly the Italians, which, because I was there for 4 years, that was completely different than most of my coworkers, because most of them were sort of still in the mindset of, we're Americans, we're going to come in and inject our culture, and we're going to inject our things, and it's our way, and we're going to institute this kind of power structure. And so at the same time that I was getting a lot of flack from the American side for like not doing, the typical sort of power structure way, I was getting awards and things from the Italians who were saying, why can't more Americans act like this? Like finally we figured out we feel like we are able to work successfully in our own country, in our own base, without this kind of American oversight. And so that taught me a lot. Then, the next kind of phase was, I was done with the military, I was done with air traffic, and I wanted to switch careers. And so I switched into software, which I had kind of dabbled with in my childhood. Same thing, right? So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to leave this power structure. There's never going to be politics again. All I have to do is just do my job well, and immediately I'll be in charge of a whole bunch of things, right? So obviously that's not the way it works, right? So, it's a dialed down level of the military. And so I spent a few years at a couple of jobs just being a normal software developer, and saw the same freaking patterns again, right? Which is, you've got a bunch of people in charge. Those people are dictating, mission and values and all of these kind of arbitrary things. You've got a bunch of people that are doing the actual work, which is the majority of the company. And those people are just lost. Everybody is lost because they're in this weird space where they're waiting for middle management to tell them what to do, but also middle management has no idea how to tell them what to do. And so they're just kind of stuck, right? And they get used to that. And I was in the same place. I got used to this notion of, well, if I can't find my own path, if I'm going to have to learn, this weird world of politics to find my own path, then I guess all that I have to do is, to just wait for middle management. And I guess the company is somehow surviving with a bunch of people who just have no real, direction. And finally, long story short, I got frustrated with it enough that I realized that the only real way that I was going to be able to run the experiments that I wanted to run in a company was to break free from that and try to start my own thing. And so that's what I did. And from the beginning, we've just tried to do everything kind of topsy-turvy from the traditional way. We've been 100% remote from the very beginning, and that's as of 5 years ago. We put in a 30-hour work week from the very beginning. All of these things that I was always constantly frustrated with my industry going, 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week is common because they're trying to squeeze as much out of you as possible. And so we just tried to do the opposite, because I had this inkling that there was a combination of patterns that was completely opposite from what most people were doing, that put together would actually work better than what most people were doing. And we're still here 5 years later. So that's the story in
In a nutshell, I
a
suppose.
nutshell. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah, there you go. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you weaving all those pieces together, because they do. When you look at them, and they certainly are reflected in your values as described on your site. And I could see as you're telling the story, like, yeah, okay, this I could see how this comes in. And so thank you for sharing us that history. And there's so many different paths I want to go just based on that story alone. It's so fun. Even the music connection, which is fascinating, because life is patterns, and the air traffic controller thing. I want to pause for a moment on the doing the opposite. I think it might have been Sam Walton who said, strategy is doing the opposite of what everyone else does, or something to that extent. And if it's not right, someone let me know
Yeah.
who actually said that. But it sounds like you're taking that idea to do the opposite. So instead of 60, you're doing 30.
Mhm.
That one would look at that and say, well, that's 25%, reduction in productive hours. But I'm guessing the difference is that you're making it up in terms of engagement, and that
Yes.
people are bought in. Is that Yeah, how does that work from a productivity perspective, the whole hour
That
thing?
that's exactly the paradox, right? And so you're starting to see companies. I feel like there was a big study in Japan of a few companies who tried to do this, like jump down to a 30-hour work week, and they actually had productivity measures that they were measuring, and they saw like a 40% increase in productivity with a 25% decrease in hours. And I think what that is all pointing to is that what we have lost sight of is the balance between our work and our life, and that our brains can only do so much. And our brains are powerful and they're beautiful, and they're able to find, beautiful things, and we're able to chase our visions, but only if we're given the space to. And us being in a creative industry, rather than, but I mean, I feel like this applies to even non-creative industries as well. The most important thing, time and time again, is that when it is time for us to solve a really hard problem, we are all in a good enough headspace that we can actually solve that problem in the best possible way, rather than just solve the problem in a quick shortcut way to say that it's solved and to get the money for it. um, that just does not last. I mean, it just doesn't. So it just goes back to that paradox of, like you said, doing the opposite, right? Giving the space and then just seeing what happens. And what happens is, for people, life starts coming first. But now that life starts coming first, when they do come to work, it is a conscious choice for them to be there. And now that work is kind of secondary to their life, now they get the space to find, well, what is it that I want to contribute to? Like, where do my passions guide me? And then when that starts happening, then the best possible thing you can do is just get out of the way, right? And allow for that space, right? It's just all about space. Most people are trying to control that space, but you have to do the opposite, right? Give it away. Do that paradoxical thing that doesn't make sense from a, total hours of productivity mindset, and realize that we're all human beings, right? And that the vast majority, probably, of the products that you are building as a business, or the services you're offering, the value comes from that 1%, of eureka moments that happen when people are in those particular kinds of headspaces. And when you have an entire team that is just doing eureka moment after eureka moment after eureka moment, it stops mattering that they're not working 60 hours a week, right? So there is a light at the end of that tunnel, and that light even makes sense if all you're looking at is the finances or the hours, or anything like that. You just have to trust that process, and wait for it to get there, and wait for kind of the culture and the mindset to reset. And then suddenly you're in a completely different world.
Well, I can see all those pieces really coming together in terms of you have the individual, you have the environment, the demands of the workplace. Does the values, the mission, and the vision, do they still come into play to set the direction for the team? Is that still important in your type of workspace?
It is. It's funny. Just probably 3 weeks ago, right? We're 5 years into Kuvio, and just 3 weeks ago, we had a team wide. Let's figure out mission and values and vision. It wasn't from the very beginning like, this is my vision and I'm going to dictate it, and and let's put a bunch of posters on the wall that say, customers are always right. Um, there's there. I feel like it does. Um, it does guide the culture, but I feel like this is another one of those things that I feel like people get opposite, because they, instead of dictating, the culture that you build naturally should reveal your mission and vision. And the perfect example of this is, I kind of started realizing 2 or 3 years into Kuvio that, even though we bill ourselves as a software design company, or a marketing company, um, we kind of, in the same way that, you hear that Amazon is not a books company, they're a logistics company, and McDonald's is not a food company, they're a real estate company, and there's a kind of an interior thing. We are not any of those things. Those products are not us. What we are is a process company. And so from the very beginning, our pure focus internally has been on running experiments to get that process right, to figure out the actual way to get out of people's way and let people's talents shine so that the combination of all of our talents can produce those beautiful things. And just constantly, I mean, I can rattle off a billion different experiments that we've run in the past 2 months to constantly continue to hone that process and figure out, like, okay, this didn't work, let's run a different experiment. Okay, this didn't work, let's run a different experiment, and just keep that going, because the secondary thing that comes out of that is the beautiful products that we make.
It's kind of like the Simon Sinek, you start with the why rather
Yes.
than the what. And
Yes,
that
exactly.
why emerged organically, and it sounds like it was clarified in the last few weeks when you're doing that mission, values, vision kind of clarification. Would you mind kind of walking us through a little bit of the process you used to come up with that clarification of your direction?
Yeah, so we got the team together, and our and a couple of people led this, but one of the very first, we basically all jumped onto a Zoom and we had breakout sessions for different activities that we ran. For example, one of the breakout sessions was, here's a whole bunch of adjectives, let's go through this list of adjectives and see what resonates with us, like, and it's like, are you agile, are you adaptable, are you this, are you that, and rank those adjectives, and then kind of come back from the breakout rooms and figure out what everybody's adjectives were. This was a perfect example of the mission being revealed, because what was interesting is that everybody was picking the same adjectives, right? Like, everybody with their own paths, our marketing team and our software team and our design team, all basically completely different industries, are all picking the same basic adjectives when it comes to the mission that we're trying to accomplish. And it was never about me, 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 me. We all just sort of naturally had this inkling of, like, our mission is not, to be the best company ever, and all those kinds of things. It was purely about defining what it was that we wanted to do to help our clients and to help our customers, and to do it in the best possible way so that they could potentially get just a little piece of that space and that alignment and that kind of process that we got, that we've sort of built, so that we could give a piece of that to them. And instead of it feeling like a client relationship, now it just feels like they're part of us and we're part of them, and we're working on something together, and we have aligned talents, right? They have a particular industry expertise that we don't have. They might have funding that we don't have. They have connections that we don't have, but we have everything else that wraps that. And the combination of those two things are just a group of people coming together to combine their talents and build something new. Where the money comes from, where the talents come from, is irrelevant to that equation. And I feel like that's something else that people get wrong. And so it just was a series of activities like that. It was you tell us, and we'll tell you, because we're all sort of on the same uh, flat surface, what you think Kuvio is. Like, where do your passions align? What do you see has been the eureka moments that you've encountered, or that you've seen others encounter, that you want to perpetuate? And it led to this kind of general idea that we all feel like we're on the right path to defining what the next generation of work could be like. And so our mission, kind of at the top line, is to basically take those ideas and try to start imparting them into organizations that 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 do have culture issues, that do have productivity issues, that do have, and become, through our execution, through our expertise, and through all of our hard work, become sort of the guiding lights for that new idea, to say, listen, you can build a sustainable company. You don't have to just live off of loans and live off of runway and be never profitable and think that's a sustainable company. You can build a 200-year company still in 2020. But what you have to do is follow those paradoxes and give them the space to do the magic that they do.
Well, that certainly sounds bigger than we're a software company and a marketing company. And one thing you said a moment ago, which I want to get into, you mentioned that we're a very flat organization. And I love how these ideas are not just ideas, these are principles by which you run the business. You're working less and you're getting increased productivity because of that engagement. And one of the things I thought was really fun is on your website, um, on the about page where you have the team listed there. First thing I noticed was that your picture is not at the top. A lot of time it's like, here's the CEO, the founder, and then here's everyone else. And you guys are living that. But not only that, when I went back to check it out later on to read more about Kuvio, your picture was, moved, but someone else's was at the top. And then I refreshed the page at least maybe 10, 12 times,
Yeah.
and your picture never came to the top. And is that sounds like that must have been intentional by design.
Yes, it was intentional. And the funny thing is, you were the first person to notice it. It was basically like an Easter egg that I put in that defined something for me. And the story is like every company that I've ever worked for, you go to their website, and the only pictures of people that you see are the CEO, the CTO, and the CMO, and some board members, right?
Hmm.
All white guys, of course. And where's the actual company, right? Like, where are like the company is not those three people. The company is the other 5,000, right? Like, you are three and they are 5,000. And people have, like, most corporations have gone so far now as to hard code that power structure into, we are the company, right? We are the public face of the company. And pretend that they're 3 or 5 or 10 people outweighs the other 5,000. And that's what that was in response to, because I wanted to make clear that I am not at the top. Like, I just have a different role to play. The role that sort of ignites my passions is to keep the 100,000 foot view, so that everybody else doesn't have to keep that view, right? And to inject, like, okay, here's a pattern that I see because here's all the ingredients of things that are going on. And, like, maybe if I can inject some things, some ingredients that other people didn't recognize, that might that might contribute to a conversation. But I never dictate, and I never say, no, this is the way that we need to go, because that's just what my talent and then on the software side, I'm an architect by nature, which is the same thing, 100,000 foot view. But it's no better or worse or different or higher or lower than anybody else on the team. It's just a different job. And most people get that wrong. Like, they put an organizational chart that represents a hierarchy of communication, but they conflate that with a hierarchy of control. And they say, like, if all of the vision comes from the founder or the CEO, then he must also have the power to dictate where the company goes in response to that vision. And that's where people get it wrong. No, all I can do is preach the vision and hope that people latch onto it. And if they latch onto it, hope that they do something interesting with it. That's it. That's my entire job, you know. And it's a lot easier than the jobs that I feel like others are playing in similar roles, where they are, both trying to communicate and to dictate when the communication falls flat.
Well, a couple things that you're saying are kind of jumping out to me. One, that detail on the about page, I thought that was phenomenal because how you do one thing is how you do everything,
Yeah.
and so you truly live in the values of that. So very cool and great to hear that. The 100,000 foot view goes even all the way back to the air traffic controller position because you can't focus on any one
Right.
object on the screen. You got to be looking at the
Right.
whole field, which is what I imagine you must do as the chief solutions architect in that matter.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask you a quick question
Sure.
on the air traffic controller issue? Because
Of course.
that fascinates me. In peak performance, which is one of the things that I study and help clients with. There's a state of being in the zone. When you're doing your job back in the day, and that's been a while now, when you're looking at all those pieces of information coming together, if you focus on the weeds, you lose the picture. That's a very dangerous situation.
Yeah.
Do you have to be like literally get into detail, like a peripheral vision, like seeing it all in at an unconscious level? Like how do you manage that moment to moment, what to pay attention to and that? And as of course a metaphor for running your business too. Yeah.
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 So it's interesting because I've never thought about it from that perspective, but just talking through the concepts of air traffic, it always felt like, so yes, you do need to be in that zone, especially once traffic gets to a point that, you have to simplify and abstract it away to a pattern that makes sense, instead of thinking that these are all giant hunks of metal moving towards you at 200 miles an hour and towards each other, right? You have to kind of get away from that. But in a lot of ways, that zone was always reactive because in a split second everything can change, right? And so it was you know it could be adrenaline driven or driven by like, okay, we have a problem that we have to solve for, and we only have one way to get it right because these planes are not going to stop midair, right? They're gonna keep moving forward, and that is the pressure of getting into the zone at the perfect time. It's interesting because thinking about that. Nobody can be in the zone for 8 hours a day. And there are tons of books that are written, about getting into flow and, in the psychology of it. And everybody's sort of chasing this idea of how do I just get in the zone where I can just crank out beautiful, things all the time. But then what's interesting, and I don't have an answer to this, but I'm starting to try and figure out what the balance is here. There are also there's also the reactive side of it, the deadline driven side of it, right? There's the, I just spent this weekend specifically focused on, for the first time in a very long time, a particular project that had a client instituted deadline of today because the deadline was impending. That was the only thing that got me to reprioritize and to put that focus on that because the deadline was there. But at the same time, I'm not a believer. I hate the concept of deadlines. I feel like there's something just still too shallow about the idea of deadlines, even though they work so well psychologically. I feel like what they're actually doing is just resetting priorities. And I'm a big believer in if you can get yourself or in your company to a space where instead of being deadline driven, you just have one queue of things that everybody is doing, and that queue is prioritized and constantly reprioritized and just constantly groomed, then the best possible thing that your company can be doing is the thing at the very top. And once that thing is done, you do the next thing. And once that thing is done, you do the next thing. And it's as simple as that. And that is where you get the best possible value. But we live in a world of deadlines, right? And so what I've been thinking about lately is how do we balance those two things? Like, why do deadlines work so well psychologically? And what is the inner guidance of that sort of reactive nature of, being productive and getting your work done against this backdrop of wanting to have the space for our creative sides to create the best possible thing, right? Every person that writes a novel gets hounded by their publisher until they're done writing the novel, right? But was it the best possible thing? But the corollary is, would you have ever finished that novel if your publisher wasn't hounding you? And in most cases, it's probably no, right? You'll go to your deathbed with an 80% done novel that you were never able to finish. So I'm very curious about that. It's to me, that's a paradox that I haven't quite figured out yet. But it's interesting that I want to think some more on the reactivity of air traffic and of other things like that as it relates to more deadline driven kind of getting into the zone and getting into the flow of things.
Well, it's a fascinating topic for sure. And George R. R. Martin, creator of Game of Thrones, right? He's still not done with the next
Yeah,
book, right? The series is
exactly.
done. And he's like, I'm working on perfecting that 1 page per day pace that he has right now. So the ideal is obviously to be in the flow, to be in the zone and go and have that list of the queue that you said, doing the next one, next one. And that's based on importance and urgency, right? That's the two dimensions that we
Yeah.
typically use, and that's determined by our values. You are right that that external deadline, it shifts the priorities. It's
Yeah.
not more important, it just becomes more urgent.
Urgent.
So is that the best place to have creative work? Probably not.
No,
But
absolutely not.
the volume increases. But then if you have volumes of not good stuff, then that's a tough situation to be in too.
Right.
So in terms of managing that, again, it sounds like the reactive piece that I see coming in, tying that back together with air traffic control, is that you have the flight plan, you know what you want to do, and there are situations where the world changes and you have to respond to that. This weekend, you had to reprioritize. That's a reactionary thing, but it's a strategic thing. You have to do it based on the demands of your environment. How do you keep your employees, your team, focused on the bigger picture? Because you said you started fully independent, location independent, right? So fully virtual, doing less work. Is there a need for engagement like initiatives, or is it self-sustaining? Are you just hiring great people who are engaged, I suppose?
It is so all of the cultural sort of lessons that we have figured out over the years and experiments that we have run have made um, our team self-engaging to a degree that um, no other company that at least I've worked in, and most other companies that I interact with now, have just never had, and that's what obviously makes me believe in the idea of the processes that we're trying to build. The the other side of that, though, is that there's never perfection, right? There's always a new thing that could maybe push that just a little bit further. That thing always tends to be people like me pulling back a little bit further and disengaging, from the things that I was traditionally engaging in and letting those things take on a life of their own. I think that's one of the sort of tenets of growing a business anyway, right? Like the more hats that you have to give away, you have to figure out how to give those hats away. Um, but I mean, I also have to look backwards every now and then and realize that even though we're still on a path forward, still trying to figure things out. I mean, I think we ran some numbers a few weeks ago, and just on the software side, our velocity is somewhere between 5 and 10 times what the industry standard velocity is, and we're able to charge 70%, 60% of what everybody else is charging, right? Because they're dealing in the world of waste and in the world of, oh, I have three giant corporations who are paying trillions of dollars to get basically nothing from a bunch of people working 70 hours a week producing basically nothing because they don't have the space to operate in the best possible way that they need to operate. And so, it's a complicated answer to that question, but 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 I mean, yes, long story short, we're leaps and bounds above most other companies, but there's always a more perfect place to be. And I feel like that road is never going to end, right? Like there's always another step to make on that journey, to really self-actualization, right? To finding the way to have a self-actualizing group of individuals that are all aligned to a common mission, is just really something that's it's just one of my dreams that I'm going to be chasing probably till the day I die.
Well, you certainly have a lot of passion for what you're doing, the processes that you guys are going through, and are willing to experiment and try what works. Have you ever had someone come on board of the team who wasn't a fit and had to kind of work to get them bought in, or is that something you were able to weed out, in the hiring process?
So this is also interesting. Um, Somehow, and this speaks to also just us doing the opposite. Um, Almost to a person, the hiring process basically involves um, a short discussion that's like, what are your passions? What are you interested in? To kind of gauge their jadedness, their level of, how far deep into the weeds are they, or is there any passion that we can latch onto? And if we see that spark, that's all it takes to us, right? We see the spark and we're like, we don't even maybe know what you're going to do for us or how it could be aligned, but we're very interested in where the company goes if you're part of it. And so then we bring them on. And then what happens is, especially depending on, how many more traditional roles that they had, they have, to a person, a probably 3 to 6 month adjustment period that involves, I mean, things is like almost everybody for weeks at a time will ghost us, just disappear, not have any idea what to do, because they're all of a sudden in this environment where it's like, I don't know, go look for something and figure out what you want to do. Like, we'll show you our projects and see what you're interested in. And like, if you're interested in something, we'll send you there. But like, not being told what to do, but instead being in an environment where it's suddenly you have both this power and this responsibility, and just figuring out kind of how to work in that environment is very jarring, seemingly for a lot of people. But once that happens, and they kind of go, okay, I think I've got this figured out. They're here for life. There is not, I mean, I hesitate to say 100% because I'm probably forgetting a story, but it's close to that. Every single person that I've ever hired is still here, no matter when I've hired them. They're all still here, and they're all still insanely happy, and they're all still insanely productive. And I feel like that speaks to something that we're doing right. So, I guess to answer your question, it's not about like, I feel like if we had unlimited money, we could approach anybody on any street and say, what's your passion, and find a place for them at Kuvio. We're never going to have unlimited money, right? And so the next best thing that we can do is hopefully empower other organizations to take on some of that load and find different ways of hiring, and stop with the power structure of hiring, right? Like, the best interviewer, if you have really good interviewing skills and, play those kind of politics, you're not going to be hiring the kinds of people who are going to be delivering the best value for your company. But you're also not going to be doing that until you figure out a way to give them the space to deliver that value. And that's the more important thing, right? If you give somebody the space, and you as a company who has, thousands of times more assets than that individual person, it is your job as a company to be the one in that relationship that is giving the space, and is giving the resources, and is giving everything possible, right? In the hopes that person will take that space and take those resources and give back, right? That's the beautiful paradox of the universe, is if you just take that second hop and first give and first trust and be patient, that will always come back to you tenfold, in relation to those that are just chasing the money, or just chasing the productivity, and just chasing, the bottom line.
Wow. One, it becomes immediately obvious, or very deeply obvious, that you care about everyone in your organization and humanity at large. So that's good to hear that you're not jaded in our turbulent times that we're living in right now. But a couple things that jumped out to me. One, you said it goes back to the patterns. So if I can find that where they're passionate somewhere in their life, I know we can tap into that on the larger vision. So you're looking for that pattern. But you're also giving them space. That had to have been a really kind of interesting experience the first time you notice that your employee is ghosting you because they're like, they don't know what to do because they're not being micromanaged. And you're like, manage yourself, figure it out. And I know it's not as distancing as that, but you're really then taking on that responsibility because of that care that's inside of it, which again is the paradoxical leadership approach, which is very millennial and socially conscious as well. So thank you for being a role model and example for that. How important, I'm a big believer in conversations. How important are conversations in Kuvio and what you guys do as a company?
Oh, I mean, communication is everything, right? So, and from the very beginning, starting out purely virtual, we really didn't have a rule book on how to solve that problem, but that seemed to be the problem. Communication and discipline are always the two big problems when people are like, I don't want to work remote, or I don't want to take my company remote, because how are we going to communicate? What about the 30 seconds, that those two people might need to spend talking to each other in a physical environment, just that's worth them communing here for 8 hours a day just on the off chance that they have to have that conversation. So we had to figure those things out. And of course, we run experiments. And of course, our bread and butter is Slack. 95% of our communication is probably Slack based. But I think what's more important to me is the the nature of the communication. Um, a lot of the sort of breakdowns in communication always seem to me to happen when um, there's a power dynamic, right? When it's like, there's a deadline. I told you to do this deadline. You didn't do it. What now? And then it kind of devolves into that sort of middle manager to worker sort of communication. At Kuvio, the culture that we're trying to obviously propagate is every single person is an expert in their own right. And that every communication that we have with anybody should defer to that other person's natural expertise in the pieces that they are contributing to that conversation. And that sort of act of, I guess, global deference has that, again, paradoxical effect of also empowering you as the other side of that communication. When you see that deference to you, it's like, oh my gosh, like, well, this is what I think I would do in this situation. And that deference is the thing that empowers both sides, right? And so that's what we focused on is trying to kind of guide everybody to realizing that every single person on the team has a unique, really specific role to play. I've gone so far as to think, and I'm still trying to fight this battle because it's extra weird, but I've like, I have this idea of making everybody a director of something, because I don't like, we have, 6 people who are director of something, right? Like architecture, design, I'm director of, architecture. But following the line of trying to be a flat organization, I like the idea, I like the word director better than I like, there are other companies like banks do this a lot. Some software companies have started doing this where everybody's a VP of something.
Mm-hmm.
But what does it even mean to be a president, right? Or a vice president? I like the executory nature of being called a director. And I feel like that's very related to what we do. And I feel like every single person, if given some time to reflect, could be like, you know what? This is the thing that I feel like I contribute to uniquely. And they are already the director of that thing without even knowing it. And so, stay tuned for for a company full of directors if I have my way. But just that general idea, right, is one that I really believe in.
Would that be similar to your values clarification, that as people stay for a period of time, that eventually they come up with their own title?
Yes. And we're already implementing that. The last few people that we've hired, we're like, whatever you want to put on LinkedIn, that's fine. We are not hiring you for your title. We're hiring you for you. You find your title and take as long as you need to find that. And it can change, right? But but that title still also hones and it allows people to sort of define, oh, this is who I go to. This is what this person is passionate about. And especially if that title ends up aligning with their passions, then off they go, right? And the best possible way to do that is to let them define their own.
I love it. Awesome. Joseph, thank you so much for sharing about Kuvio and you and your path and your philosophy and the emerging experiments that you have going on at your organization. What's the best way for people to find out more about Kuvio and you and the team that you have over there?
Sure. So our website is www.kuv.io. Which I'm very proud of. We got a year into it. I was very surprised that we got that. Here's my cat. Then as far as me directly, you can just email me directly at joseph@kuviocreative.com. My email box is open for any kinds of conversations about literally anything. I love having conversations with people, and I know that we don't have all the answers, and so we need everybody else's help to help us figure out what the next way of work is, especially now. And so, my box is open and I'm happy to chat.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Thank you.
And thank you all for listening and watching. And until next time, develop yourself, empower others, and lead by example.